Burkina Faso's leader sounds an alarm few expected. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. What if war doesn't begin with an invasion, but with preparation? What if by the time the first headlines appear, the conditions have already been set? At a recent summit of the Alliance of Sahel States, one speech abruptly changed the mood in the room. Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso did not speak first about budgets, development plans, or diplomatic progress. He spoke about danger, about timing, about something he believes is already moving toward West Africa. He called it a black winter, not a season, not a metaphor meant to impress, but a warning. Traoré wasn't predicting chaos for attention. He was describing a process, one Africa has seen before, often too late. Tonight, we're going to unpack what he really meant, why his words unsettled even seasoned observers, and why this moment may be far more serious than it first appears. Stay with me. This is why his choice of words mattered. He did not say war might come. He said war is moving toward the region. That phrasing implies preparation, direction, and intent. Wars rarely begin on the day the first shots are fired. They begin when conditions are quietly shaped. In the Sahel, people understand this instinctively. Violence there has never arrived all at once. It crept in, first through rumors, then isolated incidents, then widening insecurity. By the time anyone could point to a clear beginning, entire regions were already trapped. Traoré was reminding his audience of that painful lesson. At the summit in Bamako, the atmosphere was initially procedural. Leaders from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger gathered under the banner of the AES to discuss cooperation, security, and development. Nothing suggested that the meeting would produce a message with continental implications. Then Traoré spoke. He did not begin with achievements. He did not name enemies. He spoke about time running short, about danger forming before it becomes visible. And he described the coming period as cold, violent, and destructive, not to frighten, but to force recognition. For those listening, the silence that followed was telling. He was not reacting to yesterday's news. He was looking ahead, and he did not like what he saw. Traoré made it clear that in his view, what is coming is not random. It is being pushed. He pointed to external pressure from powers that have never fully accepted an Africa that chooses its own path. In his framing, destabilization does not begin with armies crossing borders. It begins with influence, manipulation, and internal erosion. Trust weakens. Institutions are discredited. Communities turn on each other. And only when everything is fragile does open conflict become possible. This is not abstract theory. Africa has lived it. Traoré drew a comparison many in the region immediately understood: the Arab Spring. On the surface, those movements were framed as demands for reform and dignity. And in many cases, those demands were real. But what followed in several countries was collapse. States that never recovered, societies torn apart, and foreign intervention justified in the name of restoring order. Libya is the example that haunts the Sahel. Once its state collapsed, weapons, fighters, and criminal networks flowed south. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are still dealing with the consequences today. That is why Traoré mentioned it. Not to deny the right of people to demand better governance, but to warn that when internal movements are hijacked by external interests, the result is often disaster. In his view, West Africa now risks repeating that pattern. But Traoré did not frame Africans as helpless victims. In fact, much of his message was directed inward. External forces, he argued, cannot succeed without internal cracks. Division is the real entry point. He criticized leaders who prioritize personal power over regional survival, media voices that inflame tensions rather than inform, online narratives that turn frustration into hatred. Every careless word, every tribal insult, every political smear weakens the region from within. This is where his warning becomes uncomfortable. Traoré was saying that if West Africa collapses, it will not only be because of pressure from outside, but because Africans allowed themselves to be divided. In other words, the battlefield is not only physical, it is psychological, social, and informational. And this leads directly to why he framed unity as the only real defense. For Traoré, unity is not a slogan. It is strategy. Without it, each country becomes an easy target. With it, even small states can resist much larger forces. This is why he emphasized the AES as more than an alliance. He called it irreversible. That word was not chosen lightly. African alliances have collapsed before, often under pressure, sanctions, or internal rivalry. By declaring the AES irreversible, Traoré was sending a signal. This time, retreat is not an option. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have all faced insurgency, isolation, and economic pressure. Separately, they were vulnerable. Together, they can coordinate defense, share intelligence, protect borders, and present a united political front. But Traoré went further. He insisted that unity cannot exist only between governments. It must exist among people. Agreements on paper mean nothing if societies remain divided inside. That is why he addressed journalists, influencers, and ordinary citizens as much as presidents. Unity requires discipline, restraint, responsibility. You cannot resist external destabilization while tearing each other apart internally. Yet his message was not only about survival. Traoré tied unity to a broader vision, sovereignty. He argued that security without development fails, and development without security collapses. The two must rise together. In his view, the Sahel is not poor, it is underused. Rich in land, resource, and youth, but trapped in systems where wealth leaves and little returns. A united Sahel, he believes, can begin to control its resources, trade internally, and invest in its people, rather than exporting everything raw and buying it back at a premium. This is what he means by changing the future. On the global stage, Traoré said the AES would assert its place. That means negotiating as a bloc, choosing partners instead of being chosen, and speaking with one voice instead of many weak ones. In a world where power is shifting, he sees a window for the Sahel to stop being treated as a problem to manage and start being recognized as an actor with its own interests. But he also understands a hard truth. None of this works if Africans themselves do not believe in it. Armies cannot win without public support. Economic plans cannot succeed if people feel excluded. Unity cannot last if it is seen as an elite project disconnected from daily life. That is why his warning ultimately demands something from Africans themselves: awareness, unity, responsibility. The Black Winter in Traoré's message is not destiny. It is a test, a moment where action can still prevent collapse. He is asking Africans to stop waiting for crises to explode before reacting, to stop consuming narratives written elsewhere, to stop seeing neighboring countries as rivals instead of partners. His appeal is rooted in memory. Africa has seen what happens when warnings are ignored, when leaders who speak of sovereignty are dismissed until it is too late. This time he is saying, do not wait. So when Ibrahim Traoré spoke of a coming Black Winter, he was not predicting inevitable disaster. He was opening a final window, a window to recognize the signs early, a window to choose unity over division, a window to act before events decide for us. His message leaves West Africa, and Africa as a whole, with a stark choice. Face what is coming together, or face it as fractured nations, each too weak to resist pressure alone. History shows which path leads to dignity, and which leads to collapse. The question now is simple, but unforgiving. When the storm reaches our doors, will we face it as one? Thank you for watching.